Hi everyone, in this series of videos we're going to be servicing this Lionel 00 Hudson. This happens to be an 003 with a whistling tender, and what we do to this locomotive will apply to any other Lionel 00 locomotive. And along the way, I'll show you some tips that will help in your servicing project. We're going to start disassembly of this engine by removing the Phillips screw right here on the front, which holds on the pilot. If you're working with the super detailed model, a lot of times the coupler keeps the screw from coming out. That's fine, not a problem. Next thing to do while we're up here, open the smoke box door, and we'll need to remove the headlight. The trick I like to use to get that out is a piece of 3/8 inch shrink tube, unshrunk. Put it over the headlight bulb and just turn it out. Close the smoke box door. Next thing to do is we need to remove this wire here, which is held on by this small hex head bolt. And the wire will just come right off. If you don't have a nut driver that small, the other option is to remove the Phillips head screw right here, which holds on this piston. That will drop the piston down enough that you can wiggle it out and remove the piston from that wire. There's also another wire here to be aware of. You'll have to remove it from both wires at the same time. Doing that is easier. And that is actually a 7/64 nut head. Next thing to do is we're going to go ahead and remove the Phillips head screw in the smokestack. When you do this, be aware that there's only 2 screws back here on either side holding the boiler to the chassis. And once you remove this screw, the boiler can pivot up, which would bend these screws. You don't want to do that. So whenever you pick it up from now on, you want to make sure you grab it by the wheels and the boiler. We're going to have to turn that over to get the screw out. We're going to come back here to the back and remove the rear trailing truck. When you do this, be aware and take note that these 2 screws are typically different. Now, a lot of these trains have been through various service people and disassembly and reassembly before, so things sometimes get a little out of whack. There will also be, in a lot of cases, underneath this trailing truck and the screws, springs and little cup washers that go on to these shoulder screws. You don't want to lose those. Take note of where they're placed. Mine doesn't have them because I removed them. They were causing me problems while running on my layout. I just wanted to show you real quick. You can see that this is the shoulder screw I took out of the front. That one's the rear. This one is shorter, and that one has a longer shoulder. You hopefully can see the front one also has a larger head, and the back one has a smaller head. Again, I don't know that that's 100% correct. I've never taken apart one of these that's known to be 100% original as it came from the factory. But take note of how it was disassembled and try to put it back the way it came. Because I run my locomotives, I do sometimes move those around and change the placement of the springs just to make sure that it works as I want it to on my layout. Next, we're going to remove the 2 screws here which hold the ash pan on. These are typically Phillips head screws, I believe. I had to replace mine with flathead screws. That will remove the ash pan there. Next thing we're going to do, now that we've gotten the ash pan out of the way, turn them over, there's a little cylinder right here and a bracket. A lot of times this is just hand tight, and you can spin the cylinder or this hex head screw to remove the cylinder. Now that you've got that removed, there's, like I said, this little hex head screw here, and there's a wire that goes into the center of it. You're going to want to pull this back slightly, and you can remove this bracket with the wires. This is going to make reassembly a lot easier in the future. So with that removed, we're on to removing the two Phillips head screws that are here and here. Those are removed. Both fall out. Again, make sure you're holding the chassis and the boiler. And with all of those screws removed, we should be able to remove the boiler. Pay attention, the ladders and handrails are going to come out, but handrails will stay with the boiler, ladders will stay with the chassis. Pull the boiler back, remove that wire. These pieces here also, you need to pull it back to disengage them from this large block back here. Make sure you don't lose your ladders. Put them back in your parts bin. This little screw will want to come out. Make sure you don't lose that. And there you go. This is the disassembled chassis. With the boiler off, we need to do a few more steps before we can get the chassis ready for cleaning. We'll start off by removing or unsoldering the headlight wire from the headlight holder's center contact. Next, we're going to unsolder on my locomotive this green wire. On an original locomotive, there'll actually be a magnet wire, which you may be able to see right about here on my locomotive. I added this length of flexible stranded green wire to reduce bending stresses on the original magnet wire. If you follow this magnet wire, it will enter the field right about here, and it'll be the same color as the field winding. Now, a word of caution. If you try to remove the brush plate with the magnet wire still attached, when you remove the brush plate, you have a very high risk of that wire breaking. And the only repairs at that point are to either rewind the field or source a new motor. Now, we're going to remove the two screws that hold the rear bearing plate on. Now we'll just pull the motor back and out. Make sure you remove these two shaft couplings. Now we're going to remove the 3 screws that hold on the E-unit. Use this screwdriver to prop the lever arm up because the last 3rd screw is right down here. That just makes it a little easier to get to. Of course, it wants to be difficult right now. And now you can remove the entire electrical assembly. If you're working on a 3-rail model, there will be one last screw right here which holds on a wire which connects to the center pickup rollers. Set the chassis aside for now. And we're going to go ahead and remove the brush plate after verifying that we have unsoldered that field wire. Now we're going to pull the brush plate back and watch for the brushes to fall out. Once the brushes are out, we can just pull the armature straight out. And now the electrical assembly is ready for cleaning. Moving back to the chassis, we're going to remove the 2 gearbox cover screws and the cover. Now, before removing the worm and bearings, I recommend marking the tops of the bearings. In this case, I used a R and an F to indicate the top and which bearing is front and rear. Once you get it out, look for any washers. Sometimes they stick to the bearings. There's one right there, and I know on this model there's one more that's stuck to the bearing there. And now the chassis is also ready for cleaning. With everything taken apart, now is a good time to talk about cleaning. My go-to cleaner is isopropyl alcohol. I use this 99.9% pure isopropyl alcohol, and as a secondary cleaner I use mineral spirits, and I usually use that for electrical contacts like wheels and armature commutators. Most everything gets cleaned with the isopropyl alcohol except the E-unit coil, motor field winding, and of course the armature windings. The isopropyl alcohol or mineral spirits can harm the enamel insulation on those coils. To apply the solvents, I use just about anything I can find: Q-tips, pipe cleaners, toothbrushes, dental picks, paper towels, almost anything to help remove any of the oil and grease and debris that I find. And of course, I like to use nitrile gloves because this is a pretty dirty process. For the chassis and the gears, the thing to watch out for are the bearings. Don't soak them. I find that if the bearings get soaked, then they become very thirsty for oil and always seem to run dry. Otherwise, it's just a lot of repetitive scrubbing and picking until you get all the grease and gunk out of the gearbox and the gears behind the wheels. For the electricals, watch out for the coils, as I mentioned before. And for the E-unit, about the only thing I would recommend is spraying it with the isopropyl alcohol or maybe some sort of plastic compatible contact cleaner that doesn't leave any residue behind. The idea here is you want to clean off any lubricants that are on the pivot points of the E-unit. You want to clean out any debris that would keep these parts from moving smoothly. And of course you'll want to try to spray the contacts behind the ratchet wheel with the contact cleaner. The E-unit may look simple enough to take apart, but I really don't recommend it unless you have a very in-depth understanding of how it works. Once it's taken apart, it basically loses its tuning and adjustments, and once that happens, it's very difficult to return it back to reliable operation. And for the last thing I do once everything is cleaned, I like to clean the wheel faces and the armature commutator with this Dremel carbon steel wire wheel. Always use light pressure and keep your workpiece moving when you're using the wire wheel, and I've never had any problems with it. And hopefully the next time you see all these parts, they'll be cleaned and ready for reassembly.